everyone. Welcome to ConnectCon, presented by STC Team 9794 Wizards.exe. Join us on our magical journey each month where you can hear from STEM professionals from Google, APL, iRobot, and more. My name is Anika Sharma, and I will be your host for this session. Please use the chat for any questions related to the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. Today, we're honored to have Dr.Niav Hughes Green and Dr. Amy D'Agostino from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Army Research Labs, respectively, speak about human factors psychology. Dr. Hughes Green is a human factors psychologist in the Human Factors and Reliability branch of the NRC, who provides human and organizational factors expertise to a variety of program areas important to meeting the NRC's important safety and security mission. Dr. D'Agostino worked for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for 12 years doing human factors research and developing and implementing the agency's innovation program. In September 2021, Dr. D'Agostino began working for the Army Research Labs, where she manages the Army's innovation program called XTech. Thank you so much for taking the time to present at ConnectCon. Now, can you first tell me a little bit about the field of human factors and what exactly is a human factors professional?
Hi, Nika. I think that we may have Dr. Hughes Green frozen here for a minute. So let me say hi and thanks so much for having us here. We're really excited for this opportunity to teach you a little bit about what human factors is all about. And we hope to give you a little more perspective on an exciting discipline that always is in need of bright young minds. So maybe we'll inspire some folks out there today. Let me see here. Dr. Hughes Green, are you back with us? Okay, it doesn't look like it. All right, so let me kind of take over here for a little while and say human factors is really an umbrella term that we use for several areas of research that include human performance, technology, design, and human-computer interaction. Sometimes also known as human system interaction. It's really a profession that focuses on how people interact with things like products, tools, procedures, processes, and really kind of any of those things that can be encountered in sort of our modern world. And it, like I said, it can also be considered as how humans interact with a system. So a few examples of that would be, for example, when I worked on an internship, one of the things that I was working on is a software interface. So the type of software that we all interact with every day. In this case, we were particularly working on a software for small businesses. And so we had to develop an interface that was going to be intuitive for humans to use. And, you know, so that's one example of sort of a product space where you would use human factors, right? But there's also, like I said, systems, and we're going to talk a little bit later today about the nuclear power plant system, and then also processes and procedures. And so one example that we'll talk more about is how Niav and I were actually able to work together to use our human factors knowledge to develop and implement an innovation program within the NRC. And so, you know, that was really looking at a process of how are we going to get people to give us their great ideas and be able to bring those ideas to life. And, you know, there's a science and an art to getting people to engage with both the technological platform that they'll have to interact with, and also just the processes to submit their ideas. And so I think we may have Dr. Hughes Green back with us. Is that you, Niav?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm sorry. Can you see me or?
Yes, we can see you.
We can. And okay, so Niav, okay. I think this would be a great time. Anika, if Niav maybe wants to talk about the automation and some concepts around automation. We talked a little bit about what human factors is and some examples of some products where we may have an influence, and also some procedures and processes. So I know this group is particularly interested in automation. So Niav, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks, Amy. I'm so sorry, everybody. I lost my internet connection at the last minute. This kind of what happens. Sometimes you got to go with the flow. So, one thing that you all might particularly interested in, that comprise
Dr. Hughes, you're kind of cutting out.
The human factors, how humans.
Dr. Hughes Green, you're cutting out.
I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry, Anika.
You're cutting out.
I'm cutting out. Okay. Now.
You're still cutting out a little, yeah.
Is it for my it's from my
Well, in the interim, while Dr. Hughes Green is working out her connection issues.
Okay, so
there we go.
There we are.
I'm good, Amy. I'm good, Dr.Niav. Sorry about that. It's because I had videos in the slide that I had prepared, and it seems to be having an issue with our internet connection. So back to what I was saying before, which is we can have this slide up, which will show the many different intersections of where human factors psychology and human factors engineering really intersects with a lot of different interdisciplinary groups. And one area that's really interesting that I think you all might be interested in is that how humans interact with automation and understanding how that interaction can affect performance. As a designer of a system, you want to make decisions about how things are automated. Part of this is deciding which tasks you automate and which ones to leave to the human being. One basic principle of human factors is that you want to design systems to take advantage of human strengths and mitigate human weaknesses. So bear this in mind when you're allocating various types of automation between your human teammates and your robotic or automated teammates. For example, humans are not very good at reliably repeating the same task over and over again without making a mistake. That's because humans get bored, they get distracted by something shiny that they saw, they lose their internet connection. Whereas computers are very good at this and they can reliably do it often. And a task like that, something that's very repeatable, is something that is good to automate, right? However, computers are not very good at taking abstract information and making complex decisions, but humans are quite good at that. When you get asked a question, so I had some imagery up there. When you're on the internet and you get asked that question, are you a robot? The one where you have to type out a word that's composed of oddly shaped letters. The reason that test is so effective at determining that you are not, in fact, a robot is because computers are not able to take that abstract information and reason it such that it still looks like the word that you had there, the word that you type in to say that you've that you're not a robot, typically because they have squiggly lines or they have squiggly lines going through them. And so it creates an image that the computer can't read. This is just something you have to keep in mind as you proceed in your activities in robotics. So now I'm going to turn it back to Amy to talk a little bit about, just pull the thread a little bit more on how interdisciplinary human factors can be.
Sure. Thanks, Dr. Hughes. So, something else I want to mention that I just sort of came to mind for me as well is when Niav, I'm just going to call you Niav. When Niav was speaking about repetitive tasks that humans aren't necessarily very good at and that we need to find mitigations for. If you think about it, when you go to the airport and you see people screening your bag, right, and they're watching bag after bag come through, if you notice, those screeners only stay on those machines for maybe 10 to 15 minutes and then they switch. You've probably been there when they switch. It usually delays your time in line. And the reason that they do that is because of this repetitive task. It's a very hard thing to automate, and so they need humans there to be able to catch some of these things as they get screened. However, they use a mitigating strategy of changing people out every so many minutes so that we don't hit a place where they get fatigued. So just something to think about where human factors kind of comes to life in your everyday environment. And yeah, as Niav was saying, it is very interdisciplinary. We have people with lots of different types of backgrounds, lots of different types of degrees. For example, my PhD is in a field that is probably more common to human factors professionals, which is industrial organizational psychology. So that sounds like a mouthful. Basically, if you think of psychology is about studying human behavior. I just study human behavior at work. That's my job. And Niav has her PhD in applied and experimental psychology. But we also have colleagues who have their degrees in engineering, computer sciences. I've even heard of folks ending up in human factors that were in the neuroscience field. So there's really like an intersection of a lot of different types of people and a lot of different fields. You'll hear things like ergonomics, neuroergonomics, cognitive science. Those all come in and help form the human factors ecosystem. And so this image here on the screen kind of gives you an idea of where all of those fields and different types of folks come together. So hopefully that is helpful.
That's awesome. Now, can you tell me a little bit about how you two specifically found yourselves working in this field and making human factors your career?
Sure. Well, just like everybody, we're born knowing exactly what we want to do, right? No, I'm just kidding. Of course not, right? And hopefully we have a lot of kind of young minds watching tonight. And what I want to tell you is if you don't know what you want to do at the age of 18, it's okay. I certainly did not know. When I was finishing up high school, I thought I wanted to go into biology. And so I started out my college career as a biology major. And I very quickly discovered that while I liked being in a lab, I did not like being in a lab where no one was really talking to each other. And we were just sort of looking at a lot of petri dishes. That just wasn't my cup of tea. And so I also at the same time had a psychology class that I really loved. And I started to get very interested in where a major in psychology might lead me. And so that's sort of how I started down my path. And eventually ended up working with a professor at my college who was an organizational psychologist. I took a class with him and really enjoyed the idea of studying how people behave at work. If you think about it, the majority of our life is spent at work. And so, or at least of our waking hours is spent at work. And so I think it's really interesting to study that piece. And I ended up going to graduate school at the University of Connecticut, go Huskies, and being in an industrial organizational psychology program. The interesting thing about my program is that they also had a human factors track. And so just to give you an idea, an organizational psychology tends to look at the organization down, right? So maybe we'll look at something like, how successful is this organization, and then try to understand things like the organizational culture, the processes, how they go about executing their work, what the leadership looks like, and try to understand how that success is built. So it starts at the organizational level and kind of goes down. Human factors does the exact opposite. We look at the individual up. So we say, okay, let me understand how what this individual's job is. How do they go about doing their job? How can we make sure that the tools and processes and procedures that the individual is using optimizes the human strengths and helps mitigate their weaknesses, right? And you can imagine that these sort of meet in the middle, right? Because if we have individuals who are well supported in their jobs, right, that starts to build up towards, okay, we're going to have a more successful organization with more successful people, and hopefully we're going to have a better culture, which is going to mean we have good leaders. So you can see how, it's sort of top down and bottom up. So that's how I ended up in organizational psychology. But I will let Niav talk a little bit about how she ended up in human factors.
Thanks, Amy. Very similar to Amy's, somewhat similar to Amy's path in that I did also start out as a biology major as well. And though I took maybe a slightly more circuitous route than Amy described, but nonetheless, we largely ended up in somewhat of the same place. So I graduated from University of Maryland in 2003, go Terps, with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, which you probably know, typically a basic bachelor's in psychology is actually a Bachelor of Arts. But I was interested in and took a lot of science coursework, like biology, chemistry, physics, alongside my traditional kind of psychology coursework. And I think that this primed me somewhat for a career based in the scientific method, no matter which direction I ended up taking, really. After graduating, I actually got a job in what might be considered more of a retail type industry, doing sales and management for a company called Enterprise Rent-A-Car, if you know that. I worked my way up to a branch manager, and I really learned a lot about how to manage a business, how to work in a customer service industry, and how to manage and work with people from sort of diverse backgrounds. But I wanted more from my career. And I was also interested in going back to grad school. I knew that I wanted to continue and pursue a graduate degree. In part, this was to follow in the footsteps of my late father, who held a PhD in sociology, and he had a very rich career doing human rights for the United Nations. And I knew that I wanted to be people focused. I knew I wanted to help people in some kind of meaningful way, whatever direction that I took that. I got a tip from a friend that a meet and greet happy hour at University of Maryland was taking place, where you can bring your resume and kind of meet prospective hiring agencies and companies. When I got to the meet and greet, I freshly had my resume in hand. And I discovered that most of the companies were actually looking for engineers. And as I was about to leave, a man who ended up eventually becoming my division director in the Office of Research in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, where I still work today, he looked at my resume and he said, "We are looking exactly for people who think just like you." He showed me where to apply on the USA Jobs site. And I started working at the NRC in 2006. So that's not really the end of my story, though. When I interviewed at the NRC, I expressed interest in opportunities for continuing my education. And after 2 years, working in the human factors branch in the Office of Research, an opportunity became available to apply for a fellowship in which the NRC would pay for my. I was very fortunate to pay for my grad school, allow me to attend full-time while completing part of my studies. I applied and was the very first recipient of the NRC's graduate fellowship program to pursue an advanced degree in psychology as opposed to engineering. I was able to work on my dissertation on an NRC project simultaneously. I graduated with a master's and PhD in applied and experimental psychology while working at the NRC. So the main point of my story is this. It's to show you that you can start out in one place and end up taking completely different direction. And sometimes it's all about going for it. It is about being fortunate, but it's also about taking the opportunities when they're given to you. So go for the opportunities when they arise, and you just never know where they'll take you.
That's really inspiring. So can you, both of you, tell me what you've been working on?
Sure, I will. I'll take that to start with, and so first of all, great story, Niav. And I actually didn't know you were the first recipient to go for a higher degree in psychology. So that's fantastic. So as you mentioned up front in the short bio, I worked at the NRC for 12 years, and now I'm at the Army Research Labs. I have had the great pleasure to work with Niav on quite a lot of projects. And so I could tell you a little bit about what we've done there. We've done work in a lot of different areas of research. So one of the primary areas is we study how control room operators in a nuclear power plant control room interact with the automation there, the equipment, the various systems. So we've done a lot of work in that area. We've also studied something called non-destructive examination, which is if you've ever seen an ultrasound, like when someone's pregnant, if you've ever seen them do an ultrasound, it's kind of like that, except they're doing it on pipes to see if there are any cracks. And so we went out and tried to learn how these ultrasonic technicians do their jobs and the types of things that affect their jobs. So for example, that might be somewhere where you have heat as a factor, or you have to think about the type of equipment that they need to carry out into the field with them, the different types of technology that they might interact with. And so we've studied quite a few different things. From an automation standpoint, I know that's a big interest here. We've looked at things in a control room simulator specifically, where we looked at, okay, well, what's the difference if you might automate one task versus doing it manually? What is the difference in sort of the time to completion for that task? You know, or we might look at the different technologies. Does it make a difference if someone's interacting with a touch screen or a mouse click, right? All of those types of things can affect someone's performance in a job. And that performance, particularly when we were doing work, when I was doing work for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, can affect safety, right? Which is an important piece of our work. And so, and then most recently at the NRC, right before I left to go to the Army Research Labs, we were working on, when I talked before about the human up versus the organization down, whereas a lot of the things I just mentioned were sort of the human factors, we were looking at the human within the system and looking up. We were able to actually work on a project, we were looking at the organization down. So our organization was trying to make some changes, and they wanted to be more innovative. They wanted to give employees a better and more a richer opportunity to bring their really great innovative ideas forward, so that we could do our jobs better, faster, smarter. And so Niav and I were actually able to help with that effort and look at the organization and say, okay, within this organization, knowing what we know about it, how do we establish an innovation process that will encourage people to bring their ideas forward? And so that's really where my organizational psychology background came into play, but also understanding how people work within the NRC, which is that individual level. And so, this also involved us understanding like how people use tools, because in this case, in order to establish our innovation process, we really needed a place for people to bring their ideas forward. And we did that through a software platform. And so we needed to look at the interface. Was it easy to use? Because as we all know, if an interface isn't easy to use, guess what? People are out of there. And so you need to give them tools that are intuitive and are kind of fun to use and easy. And so all of those things sort of happened in this innovation project. So it's been a really rich experience over the 12 years I was with the NRC. And on all of those projects I just mentioned, Niav and I got to work together. So that was, we were very blessed to have wonderful colleagues. And I have since transitioned to the Army Research Labs, which actually came out of that last project, the innovation project, where I am now managing the innovation program at the Army Research Labs. It's a little bit different, whereas our NRC program was really focused on bringing ideas from employees forward. This innovation program is called XTech, and the goal of it is to really bring innovative technology that small businesses are developing to the soldier. So we want to be able to find out what those innovative technologies are and how we might be able to better equip our soldiers. And so that's what I'm managing over there. It's been really interesting and a great challenge. I just started there in September. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Niav to talk a little bit about what she's been up to.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. So as Amy mentioned, we've worked together for many years and been able to really collaborate on a number of very exciting projects together. I've been with the Office of Research at the NRC for the last 15 years. And one of the first projects that I got to work on with Amy was that simulator project we've mentioned a couple times. It's called the Human Performance Test Facility. And for that project, we partnered with a university to systematically collect human performance data using a simulator of a nuclear power plant to further understand how operators perform some certain simple tasks that they might perform in a main control room of a power plant. We also did a project together where we investigated, as Amy mentioned before, the human factors associated with non-destructive examination or testing, also called NDE or NDT. NDE is this testing and analysis technique to evaluate the properties of a component, structure, or system, where they're looking for defects or discontinuities without actually causing damage to the component because it's currently in operation. So it wouldn't be very safe to take it out just to do this test. So they have to actually go into the plants and do these tests. It's used in industries like the nuclear industry to prevent destruction of important components like pipes that can degrade over time by identifying an issue and taking that component out of service in the event that it's not prepared to work properly and safely. And they use, as Amy already described, they use the various techniques like the ultrasonic testing. And these professionals who perform these tests, they sometimes have to get into these crazy, unique positions. They're climbing physically all around to perform these tests in the nuclear power plant. And Amy and I actually had the opportunity to interview these NDE professionals to really learn about their job and even get to observe them at their work in the nuclear power plant, in the real nuclear power plant. So we climbed ladders to see different areas of the power plant. We really got a firsthand view to get to understand what these professionals do. This is something that you really need to do as a human factors professional, is that you need to learn and understand somebody else's job. So, and then, again, the other project that most recently I also have been working on is the innovation project that Amy kind of referenced. And so we worked together on this organizational culture change project to develop the internal program for the NRC where employees could submit and grow their innovation ideas. And we applied new ways to the way we work at the NRC through this program. For the project, we got to apply, our skill set, our human factors skill set, and use human factors practices to develop this innovation framework that the NRC uses right now at this moment, and discover the tools needed for this innovation program. We performed, the research, and we did the benchmarking. We looked at other external federal organizations, innovation programs, and we also conducted focus groups and interviews to gain lesson learned. We kind of identified the pain points. So pain points are kind of areas where people said, the process didn't work before because of this reason and that reason. And so we sort of identify what those pain points were from previous programs with the purpose of fixing or correcting those issues for the new program. And one of the areas that we identified that really needed to change was this need to a shift in the culture. We wanted to bring sort of a recognition-rich culture to the NRC in terms of recognizing innovative contributions, because you need to have kind of the same idea that Amy's already explained, which is this bottom up and top down. You need it coming from both places. You need the people at the the employee level to be recognizing when things are innovative, and then you also need the senior leaders and the senior management to come down and say, we recognize that these innovations and these contributions that you're bringing are making our organization better, and we are we want to be able to recognize that, and that we identify that as an important area that needed to be fixed, essentially. And so we actually developed the framework to enable our agency to consistently reward and recognize innovative behavior in our agency. So this was kind of a unique contribution that Amy and I think were able to give because of our human factors backgrounds.
So can you tell me a little more about this nuclear reactor simulator project?
Yeah, sure. We could definitely talk a little bit about that. So, so just to kind of bring you back to where we were, right? We've talked a lot about how, human factors professionals can influence anything from how we create an interface to a software product, all the way through how do we structure an innovation process, right? All of those things have to do with human behavior and how we interact with our world, right? And so, this simulator project is really no different. This project came about because we had a lot of questions about how humans interact with a very complex system. That complex system, in our case, being a nuclear power plant control room. And, to answer those questions, right, if most people know that if you're a scientist, right, the way that you want to try and answer those questions is through experimentation and gathering data and gathering insights, right? Well, that's really difficult to do when you're talking about a nuclear power plant, right? Because you can't do experiments in a live control room, right? That would be very unsafe. And so, a lot of our work is around being safety related. And so we needed to find a safe way to answer these questions. And one of the ways that we can do that is through simulation. So another kind of complex piece of this is, for those of you who don't know, there are about 100 nuclear power plants in operation. I think a little bit less than that now. And in each one of those power plants, there's probably, I'm giving a guesstimate of about 15 to 20 control room operators, okay? And so you can imagine, right, if you only have 20 people and a little less than 100 plants, when you think about the population of the United States versus the population of control room operators, is not very many, right? So we've got an environment that it would be unsafe to do experimentation in, right? And we've got a very small population of operators. And so it's really hard to get the time of the control room operators. So even to ask them questions or be in the control room observing what they do is kind of difficult, right? And so one of the ways that we can get around that is by using simulation, and using other populations like former operators or even university students, right? Because remember that ultimately we're studying human behavior, right? And so there are some components of behavior that are human, right? They're not specific to control room operators. For example, reaction time, okay? we can do a study where we take university students and we put them in a control room simulator and we say, okay, in version A of the control room simulator, you're going to interact with a touchscreen. And in version B of the simulator, you're going to interact with a mouse click. And we're going to see how many errors you have in touchscreen versus mouse click. We're going to see how fast you can do these tasks in the two different interfaces, right? And that starts to give us some insight about the relative safety of different types of interfaces, right? And so all of that can contribute to our knowledge of understanding how humans are able to interact with these systems and how reliably and safely. And so I'm going to kind of stop there and let Niav take you a little bit further down this road, but that sort of gives you the background of, why would we be doing this? And so Niav, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy. So Amy talked about the challenge of kind of accessing the real world control room as being one of the things that we kind of needed to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to be able to make the control room that we use for the experiments be as similar as possible to the control room in the real world? So first, what you need to know, Amy kind of give you an idea about how many nuclear power plants there are in the United States, but also, what you need to know is that most of those plants are still using largely analog controls. Analog controls are things like the physical buttons that you push, a dial, or a hand crank. These are three-dimensional instruments that you physically move with your hand. Many plants are, of course, modernizing, they're upgrading or replacing certain controls and displays such that they're digital. And that is also another exciting kind of area for human factors research. But a traditional control room actually looks like the image there in the top left of the screen. It's a three-dimensional room with analog controls on these boards and panels across that layout. The simulator that we used for our research was actually a digital display of an analog control room displayed on screens. You can kind of see what I mean in the image at the top right on the slide. We used this simulator to further understand how operators perform common tasks in a main control room. So how do we measure? How do we measure how they performed? Some of the ways that we know that participants have to, let's say, work harder or think more when they perform certain actions through when we want to compare, interacting with a computer screen versus having to actually physically turn the instrument in front of them is with, as with the analog, in the analog scenario that I was describing, is we can measure how frustrated they are by having them answer a questionnaire about how difficult or how frustrated they were when they performed those tasks. We also can do this by measuring their body response, their physiological response. Does their heart rate go up, indicating that they're stressed? Do certain areas in their brain light up? These are just some of the ways that we measure how they're performing, and we can compare performance among the different types of people, such as when we use former operators versus the trained, the university students that Amy was talking about. And this allows us to have a way to check to see if the results that we find with students will really represent what we might find with operators. The way we do this is by first testing with lots of students to see if we get repeatable results. Then we run the test with former operators. If we see trends, then we can kind of say, hey, it's about how humans interact with that system in general, not necessarily just because they're specific experts in that field. This is how we meet the challenge of access to real power plant operators, as well as we use the simulator to meet the challenge of access to an actual power plant. We use what we call a surrogate population. So in this case, students. After we've demonstrated what's called our proof of concept through showing these trends exist and that they are more related to just being a human being and interacting with the system than being an expert operator. So relating to that, to the reaction times that Amy was talking about before. And we can kind of use this particular experimental methodology over and over again. And we developed this so that we could investigate new questions about, about how future operations are going to be going when, new power plants are going to be using more automation. And some of the things might be, that we might automate some of those basic tasks instead of having the human operator perform them, and see what does that do for operator performance in terms of enhancing it, making it safer.
So can you tell me a little bit about the ways you have worked in interdisciplinary teams?
Sure. So as we kind of have mentioned a couple times, I think human factors is really inherently interdisciplinary. As a human factors professional, your job is actually to learn about what other people's jobs are, so that you can learn how to research them better, or develop products or designs for technology that will help them make their jobs easier, faster, safer, or better in some way. For the simulator project, for example, we worked with subject matter experts from a variety of various domains to get the job done well. An important part of the scientific method is repeatability and laboratory control, such that each participant in a sample experiences relatively the same thing. This is how you draw generalizable conclusions, right? We needed to ensure that we balanced our expertise for conducting experiments with creating a realistic environment that could be generalized to the real world, because that's what we really want to do. Don't really care about if it happens in an experiment. What you really care about is, what's it going to be like in the real world. And we learned from subject matter experts in nuclear operations. So what that means is somebody who used to work in a main control room of a real nuclear power plant. Similarly to how we interviewed, those NDE professionals, we wanted to be sure that we were able to understand what their job was about, so that we could create a realistic yet controlled laboratory experiments, right? That we were going to get good data out of, that we could draw conclusions on. And we also needed to work with a simulator engineer to help us create that environment and enable us to run an experiment that had the right balance between experimental control and realism. And we also have worked with universities, so that means we're working with professors and graduate students. So there's really a lot of different types of experts that we get to collaborate through some of this work. And now I think I'll turn it over to Amy to talk about a little bit of some of her interactions with interdisciplinary teams.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, every human factors project is really ultimately interdisciplinary, because like Niav pointed out, ultimately we are trying to understand what other people do in their jobs. So you're going to always be interacting with the job owners, if you will. For example, I had mentioned earlier that when I was in graduate school, we had to go and do a year-long internship experience. And I worked for a small company that actually helped other companies be more innovative. And specifically, we were working a lot on products. And in one case, we were working on a software product for small business owners. It was actually to help them manage their kind of mailing to advertise for their businesses. And so we needed to understand the work of small business owners. We needed to understand what they needed to accomplish, how they went about doing their marketing and advertising, and then build a software interface to help them with that job. And so I was interacting with the small business owners. I was interacting with software engineers. I was also interacting with salespeople who were ultimately going to be trying to sell this product. And so that's an inherently interdisciplinary team, right? And in pretty much every project I've worked on, you have that. You may be working with what we would call the end user or the job owner, right? Whose world are you trying to make better? Are you trying to make the iPhone users world better by having some new feature? Well, you're going to have to interact with that user. You're also going to have to interact with the software folks who are going to help you make the changes in the system. You're probably going to have to work with leadership, right? Who's going to be making some of the decisions. You're going to have to maybe work with sales folks. You might have to work with technical experts from various different fields, depending on what you're working on. And so I think I don't know of a team that I've ever been on that has been solely comprised of human factors experts, because that means that we're not trying to learn someone else's job or trying to learn what someone else needs to make their work world better, and that's just never the case for human factors folks. So hopefully that helps.
And how do you get different types of people to work together?
So, I think a big part of working with different types of people is getting to know their language, so to speak, and learning to speak or communicate with them in their language. And what I mean by that is get to know what we call in human factors is their taxonomy, which is basically the words that they use to describe things. Sometimes there are multiple words to describe the same or similar things, but depending on your area of expertise, they may be different. For example, maybe a computer science person is going to talk about something in one way, and then an engineer would talk about the same thing in a different way, and then a psychologist would come in and talk about it in a totally different way. And so when you're kind of in a meeting with people with different backgrounds, I think my biggest advice would be don't be afraid to stop and say, hey, can you clarify what you mean by that word or by that? What can you clarify what you meant by what you just said? This is what I heard you saying. This is what I was thinking it means. And I just want to get on the same page. You should not be embarrassed to ask questions like that. If you don't know all the terminology that another expert is using, part of being an expert is acknowledging the boundaries of your own expertise and that you don't know everything. And that is perfectly okay. If you can talk to people and understand one another, your ability to work together as an effective team will be much improved. So I think that would be my biggest advice.
Yeah, Niav, I couldn't agree more with you. I think, in addition to learning other people's languages, you need to learn if you have a team of people, one of the most important things you can do is to get to know each other and determine what are different people's strengths, and then capitalize on those strengths as you work in teams. For example, some people are really great at conveying ideas and presenting, right? So maybe they're the people that are going to do, the pitch for your project, right? They're going to present at the conferences, or they're going to talk to leadership about what you'd like to do. And you might have other folks who are really good at organization, and they're going to make sure that they know all the tasks that need to be done on the project and the timeline that they're going to get done on. And so you want to capitalize on those strengths, and no one person on the team is going to be good at everything. I think that knowing your teammates and also knowing yourself, right? Knowing what you're good at. Sometimes I think that we like to think we can kind of do it all, right? Or that maybe we could do something better than someone else. But the reality is that we all bring something to the table, right? We all bring strengths and we all bring weaknesses. And so I think it's about kind of being truthful to yourself about what those strengths and weaknesses are, and then also observing those in other people, and then being really able to come together as a team and say, okay, we're going to capitalize on our strengths, and I'm not going to feel like I need to do it all, because that's where kind of teamwork falls apart, right? When any one or two people think that they need to do it all, or that any one or two people know the best way to do all the pieces and parts of a project. there's a lot that goes into big projects like Niav and I work on, and so you need the strength of a team. And so, I would say to work together, accentuate your strengths, and keep communicating.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hughes Green and Dr. D'Agostino, for a wonderful presentation. We've had a lot of questions from the audience, so let's start with the first. Who else do you work with to get your jobs done? Like, obviously, in this field, you're going to be working with a lot of people. Like, do you work with IT specialists or scientists or engineers?
Yes, is the short answer to that. So yeah, so listen, we're gonna work. For example, here's a great example of knowing the boundaries of your expertise, right? Um, I know about human behavior, right? That's where my expertise is, but I don't know about nuclear power plant operation, right? Some of the engineers that I work with are experts in that, right? They understand all of the nuclear systems and how they work together, and I need to lean on them in order to understand what they do. Now, I also have people who can explain to me, well, how do the controls in the control room work, right? And those folks might be some IT folks, they might be some software engineers, they might also be mechanical engineers. And so we're working with all different types of people depending on the subject matter that we're talking about, right? So you need your subject matter experts, but then also the technology. There's almost always technology involved in just about every job in our world, right? So there's always going to be that component as well, understanding the technology. And so, we're kind of always interacting with those folks.
And then I would just kind of add to that too, Amy, which is, since we work for the government, we also have to interact with other types, not just engineers, not just IT specialists, but the lawyers and the people who are experts in human resources and who understand all the laws and the policies that you have to adhere to when you're trying to develop, like, for example, the innovation program that we developed. We had to make sure that we were doing things lawfully and that we were not breaking any laws, and that we were mindful of those. And we had to, again, like Amy's talking about, leaning on those people for their expertise. We had to do that in a lot of different senses. So it's really very very broad, the types of other types of folks that we have to interact with on a pretty regular basis to get the work that we want to get done.
What's your favorite part of your job?
Oh, I can answer that easily. I love learning what other people do for a living. That's fascinating to me. It's like you never really have to pick a career because you can keep learning what everyone else does. And I also just love making the time that we spend at work more enjoyable, better, faster, smarter for folks doing work every day. But it is so much fun to find out what other people do and why they chose that career. I love it.
I would say, part of what I love is I love working with great colleagues, like I got to work with Amy for so many years, and coming to work every day and talking with other people who are just as passionate about bringing some positive to the world, at a greater, on a greater level to the world. But ultimately it's just to our little pocket, our little piece. But it's finding and meeting the people who are equally as passionate about it.
And for our last question, what's a piece of advice you can give to a robotics team on our software automation?
Yeah, I think I would have to go back to, really teamwork. I think that the best thing that you can do for any project, no matter what you're working on, is capitalize on your strengths, know what everybody brings to the table, and work together. We can get so much more done when we work together than when we, sort of fight each other. And ultimately, right, it feels really good when you can come together as a team, and the credit and kind of the victory is shared. I think that is kind of the most satisfying thing you can do as a team. So that's what I would say: capitalize on the strengths of your team and work together.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Amy. The other thing I would say is, you know, to be excited to learn, get in there, learn about automation, Google everything, research it, read papers that you can find on human automation interaction, to really inform the decisions that you're making on your robotics team to create the best product, for your group. And so by using, not just capitalize on the strengths of your teammates, but get out there and kind of like eat up the knowledge that definitely exists. It's just out there for your taking.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. If you have any more questions regarding the presentation, please email to us, and we will look forward to we will forward them to our wonderful presenters. If you would like to be informed about more events and videos by our team, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out our website at the links below. Thank you, Dr. Hughes and Dr. D'Agostino today for presenting at ConnectCon. And thank you everyone for attending the presentation today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This has been wonderful, and I wish you guys all the luck.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nico. It was really great to be here, and really appreciate you listening to us today. I wish you the best.
Thank you so much for presenting. I know I said it in the presentation, but thank you so much. It was super interesting.
Oh, good. It was fun. This was awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm so sorry about my internet.
No, it's completely okay.
Niamh,